The Ivory Port, Chapter 1, Falling Skies. It was during the brief silence after the heaven was lit brightly by a dazzling thunderbolt when Captain Herman Ahab Jorgensen, leader of Barak Farok's skyport, stood on the deck, drenched by heavy rain. Barak Farok's was a small but strong Kharadron base known for its fearless hunting crews and competent engineers. The deafening thunder roared wildly over the heavens of the savage lands of Ghur, realm of beasts, as Jorgensen straight-faced noted the ascending figures in the gray cloud. A massive force of Tzeentch demons and followers led by a Lord of Change appeared close to the skyport, howling and staring greedily like thieves at a treasure. The greater demon pointed his witch staff at Barak Farok's, while Jorgensen simultaneously shouted, "All hands on deck!" and the Chaos Horde stormed off. Led by their sturdy captain operating his large airships, an ironclad called the White Ossex. The Kharadron forces consist of a squadron of Grunstock gun haulers, some frigates, and took off to defend their ground troops. These smaller airships were manned by a battalion of Kharadron elite troops, the Grunstock Thunderers. The frigates and gun haulers plunged from the docks straight towards the attackers. The Chaos followers engaged the Kharadron fleet with a great number of their forces. Smaller groups of Zangor Skyfires and Shaman, bird-like demonic creatures led by a Magistar, ignored the airships and vigorously attacked the skyport directly. Basic troops, the Argonaut companies desperately tried to defend Barak Farok's hover engines from the skyport deck. Although the Kharadron forces fought hard and managed to banish many of the Tzeentch demons back into their dimension, the devastating racket of skyport engines and ships cutting through the air was omnipresent. At the time when the last glimmer of hope seemed to be gone in the Kharadron forces, the White Ossex appeared with hazardous maneuvers piercing through the thunderstorm clouds behind the enemy's lines, and the Lord of Change in charge, dropping all his bombs and sky mines at once. The heavily worn-out forces of Tzeentch saw their leader fading into black cloud and smoke, and fully armed ironclads rising beneath them started firing all of its guns, and so they panicked. The victory seemed to be possible when the black smoke faded away and revealed the heavily wounded demon howling in agony. The White Ossex's great sky cannon turned and took aim. Pressed by gunfire, the Lord of Change continued to cast an enormous arcane bolt and fired it at one of the remaining skyport hover engines just before passing. Jorgensen saw the exploding engines and Barak Farok's, already crooked in the sky, started to tumble. It was to the merit of Matilda Scientia, leader of the Barak Farok engineers, that the skyport was only tumbling slowly. She had coordinated her colleagues during the fighting to divert power of the hovering system in the last remaining turbines. The White Ossex set course to the skyport when all of a sudden a nasty bang shook the ironclad. The Magister, leading the Zangor attack on Barak Farok's, had hidden in the clouds with a group of remaining Skyfires and now tried to destroy Jorgensen's ship. Covered in smoke, the ironclad was heavily damaged and disabled. Jorgensen grappled his dirigible suit and jumped off the deck, followed by his loyal engine rigger guard. They headed straight towards the Tzeentch followers and found themselves in a fierce broil without any kind of tactic. It was a clash of pure ethermatic saws and rivet guns versus beaks, horns, and magical arrows. Finally, in the midst of an ongoing rage, Jorgensen, who was a master with the skypike, was able to bring down the Magister with a well-aimed toss. Looking around, Herman Ahab Jorgensen saw all the demons had died, but only 2 of his engine riggers were left, and a tumbling ironclad and skyport sank into the clouds below them. Chapter 2: The Landing. A cold, harsh wind was blowing on the summit of the Tooth. This was the name the local inhabitants had given the old mountain because its peak was almost always covered in snow, and from a great distance it looked like a single white tooth towering over the surrounding area. The silence of this winter morning was torn up by a detonation coming from the sky. Metal spikes pierced through the soft cover of clouds, revealing the enormous skyport of Barak Ferox smoking, burning, and tumbling towards a great plateau on the side of the Tooth's summit. With deafening noises which seemed to be never ending, the skyport scratched over the plateau, startling up all the birds in the area, and was finally stopped by the towering summit itself. It took 2 days until the fire was quenched and the injured Duarden were salvaged. Matilda, who was one of the lucky survivors without greater injuries, to inform Jorgensen about the dire technical state of the fallen skyport. A big amount of their supplies were burned down and none of the remaining ships were intact. The captain had no choice but to assemble some scouting groups to explore the surrounding area. While only a few of the scouts returned, most of the survivors reported attacks by some big cat-like savage animals. Others spoke of strange plants, and even one Duarden was eaten by a stone when he sat to have a break. When his remaining comrades took a step back, the stone snarled at them with its giant mouth and ran away. One of the returning groups was able to locate the fallen ironclad far below the snow line of the mountain. Matilda Scientia suggested sending an expedition to the White Ossex to check the ship's state and at least get some spare parts from it. Chapter 3. The Hunt. Jorgensen startled in his sweat from a dream full of wild noises and claws, when suddenly his adjutant knocked at the door of the cabin. "My captain, come quickly, something's happened." It was the night before Jorgensen and a group of specialists wanted to decamp for the expedition to the fallen ironclad. When the captain and his adjutant stepped on the deck of the crashed skyport, the cold, harsh wind continued to blow snow over the wrecked metal floor. Jorgensen saw a group of Grunstock Thunderers lean over something. The heavily armed Duardens stepped aside for their captain, revealing a ragged body of an Argonaut Company member and heavily wounded comrade leaning at the railing. His arm was missing, and the traces of giant claws covered his whole body. Starting at the skyport's railing, there was a blood trail leading into the dark, snowy night. "We were attacked. Pack of white stammered the Duarden with his last breath. "Bring me my sky pike," Jorgensen said calmly. Only a few minutes later, the captain stomped through the blanket of snow, followed by the Grunstock Thunderers and 2 remaining engine riggers of his bodyguard. Matilda and his adjutant had tried to dissuade Jorgensen from departing by night, but for him, enough was enough. After the loss of so many of his comrades, his beloved White Ossex, and the fall of the skyport, this was the final straw. He was tired of being defensive and waiting, even if there were some of the most important characteristics of a hunter. At some point, you needed to snap a shot off. After following the blood trail for a great distance, they reached a cave, hidden on the side of the Tooth. Slowly, they surrounded the entrance and took position. Jorgensen beckoned one of the Thunderers armed with mortar fire to launch inside the cave. A slaughter followed. After the mortar fired and withdrew behind a rock, several of the cat-like creatures covered in white fur and big tusks protruded from their mouths, jumped out of the dark in panic and fury. The Duardens started firing their ether shot rifles and deck sweepers. One of them, armed with a fumigator, was filling the scenery with smoke. As all guns fell silent, Jorgensen and his comrades stared into the smoke, trying to make out whether or not the creatures were still alive. When suddenly, a giant exemplar of the creatures, cluttered with scars, jumped through the smoke, cutting one of the Thunderers in half with its massive claws. The Duarden didn't even have time to perceive how easily the claws had cut through the heavy armored suit of the Thunderer. After some staggeringly fast moves from the beast, Captain Jorgensen saw most of his comrades wrenched in their own blood, laying motionless in the snow. He was the only one left, with his sky pike versus the big, heavily breathing creature. Staring into each other's eyes, it seemed as if hours had passed, when all of a sudden, the white beast jumped forward. Matilda stood peering from the skyport railing into the still landscape. Dawn was already breaking, and yet there was no sign of this hunting group. As deputy commander in charge, she decided to take the last intact dirigible suit to search for the captain. While one of the Argonaut Company members helped her to don the suit, a shout from the lookout was heard. On the horizon, Matilda saw two small figures approaching. Using the ethermatic binoculars, she recognized one of the Thunderers and also her captain. Chapter 4: A New Era. Captain Herman Ahab Jorgensen stood, covered with the white fur of the beast and the skypike in his hand, at the railing of the White Ossex. He felt pleased looking at the Barak Ferox. The former skyport had grown together in its surrounding environment. Like a mushroom on an old tree made of metal, the Kharadron city protruded from the side of the tooth. All kinds of airships from different skyports were landing and starting off the piers. After his bygone victory over the White Beast, the Dwardens took a heart and braced themselves for this new harsh land. They blazed a trail from the mountain to the surrounding jungles and locations of the White Ossex, exploring the wilderness and fighting against all kinds of wild animals, orc tribes, ogres, and other savage creatures. Their craftsmen, who had already worked on animal products like the teeth of ether sharks in the long-gone past in the heavens, have mastered to craft the extremely strong ivory from the Ghur beasts and managed to replace a lot of their old metal parts with it. The engineers also figured out how to use the gases from the innards of the beasts as energy sources for their converted ships, fumigators, and mining machines. Like their ancestors, they started the old art of mining in the mountain again. And when they discovered veins of ether gold traversing within the cave system within the mountains of Ghur, it was clear they'd stay. The ivory, becoming their main trading good, and trophies from the wild animals of their armor and ships, has given Barak Ferox their new memorability, appropriate to their new home. When they reached out after years on the ground with their new fleet to other Kharadron skyports to renew old trade agreements, they were quickly known as the Ivory Port, and one of the first ground-based Kharadron Overlord cities. Friends, that was our third entry contest winner from our most recent contest focusing on Ghur. And I have to say, I absolutely love this story because, one, it does highlight the realm of beasts. You know, that this is a dangerous place. They crash landed because of a Tzeentch attack. It's going to happen. First of all, I've always wanted to see a story about a skyport crashing. That just sounds so rad. The characters that we get, like the captain, we also have obviously the lead engineer, Matilda. I just absolutely love the characterization of these two because they both have very different roles, but they kind of filled different needs within what the skyport needed. Matilda kept it, slowly falling, so they didn't just insta-die. And the captain did his best to kind of give them a chance to get away. I loved the scene where Jorgensen was like, screw this, we're going hunting. He's like, in the middle of the night, he was like, I'm sick of this. I'm sick of falling. I'm sick of losing. We're going to go kill something. We're going to go punch something back. And that's exactly what they did. But in so doing, what they essentially are is kind of taking on the aspects of Ghur for themselves. You can't just be a defender who's trying to rebuild your ship and get back into the sky. No, you need to assert yourself as a predator in this realm. You can't let, these cat creatures come and take away some of your people. You need to go annihilate them as an enemy. Assert yourself within the food chain. That's exactly what he did. In fact, this whole story really highlights two things. One, if you somehow just wind up in Ghur, this is exactly what you do, right? It's kind of like, you walk into prison, you walk into the yard, you pick the biggest guy and you punch him in the face. That's from the movie, was it The New Kid or something like that? That's the same idea, right? You didn't want to be on the ground in Ghur, but here you are. How do you win? You pick the biggest thing that's picking on you locally and you punch it in the face, right? And that's exactly what he did, and I love it. But you're doing that in one hand, right? That's exactly what happened. But on the same token, they're also doing exactly what the Kharadron Overlords are so interesting for. That they are a society of Dwarden whose core concept is adaptability, right? When they were getting driven out of Chamon, Realm of Metal, adaptability is why they became airborne. It's why their entire economy and lifestyle is based upon keeping everyone literally afloat, protecting your clan and your kin and that kind of stuff. And so this transition of like, we're not in the sky and we landed here, and actually there's a whole bunch of resources here that we can use. There's not really a pressing need to get back into the sky kind of a thing. I absolutely love it because it just shows that same temperament, what made the Kharadron Overlords who they are. I also think would make them incredibly successful in a environment that is as hostile as Ghur. And so that bit really stood out to me, that, you know, the conclusion, the new era that is described here, really just, I don't know, even though it's very different for Kharadron in terms of they're not flying in the sky. I mean, they have ships and stuff like that still. Their home base, their skyport is now just a port. Take the sky out of there. But it shows their adaptability. It shows the thing that makes them who they are, regardless of whether or not they're in the sky. So I really appreciated that. Now, I was a bit confused when, it's a pretty short story, the contest that I run, and I saw like chapter 1 through 4, and I was like, oh man, this is crazy. But what's so awesome is that like the way that these chapters are split, they're really just little gaps in the story, maybe like a week or two, something like that. The gap between 3 and 4 would obviously be longer because they've built out their city a bit more and repaired it. But I loved it because I was reading this and I was like, if there was a survivor of this skyport crash and he was trying to relay to somebody else how this happened, this is exactly how it'd be written. That there's a few quotes, but not a ton. There's really just the highlight points. We were attacked by Tzeentch and we crashed. When we crashed, something was hunting us. Jorgensen went out and he hunted it, and now we've established ourselves and are rebuilding. You know, like if you were writing a diary to somebody else, like this is kind of the form that it would take. And so using the short story format to tell a story like this, I thought was incredible. I really, really enjoyed it. So friends, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you are a Kharadron Overlord player, how can we integrate ideas of using bone and primitive tools and that kind of stuff, mixing it with high technology and fantasy and arcane stuff? I think that it would be really cool. So I would love to learn more about the Ivory port and all the cool things that it brings. In fact, this is the kind of story, if I'm going to be perfectly honest, if far in the future Games Workshop wanted to bring all Duarden under one book, like Fire Slayers, Dispossessed, and KO, these are the kinds of cities that would allow that really cool narrative to make sense. And so I'd love to see stuff like this. It's right up there with taking Fire Slayers into the sky or up in mountains and that kind of stuff. And so I absolutely thought it was fantastic. I love the way that they went back to, quote unquote, the olden days where dwarves were miners. I'm like, that's so cool. That's how you want to have your lore be. That's a great way to get them there. Just fall out of the sky. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave in the comments down below. Congratulations. This is, again, like I said, number 3 winner of our short story contest. We'll have another one coming up here pretty soon, and I'll see you again tomorrow for the next short story, number 4 on our list. Thank you all so much for watching and listening, and happy wargaming.